Employee engagement requires an organization to have the level of support to ensure the employees are committed and focused on the company's vision for future success. These factors are important to understand when attempting to build a culture of high-performing teams. The following interview clips will provide a glimpse into the factors that define and impact employee engagement from the perspective of three individuals who work at the same organization.
When I think of engagement, I think of being into something, like almost the intuitiveness of that someone it has. So the 2012 Forbes thing that came up on Google was their emotional commitment. So I would think of the sort of participation in a heartfelt way would be my way of hearing that. Like if someone's engaged, they're into something, they like doing it, they want to do it, and yeah, they're into it.
Oh, and I thought about this last night. I would look at employee engagement as how passionate and invested employees are with their organization. And that can be a function of quantitative and qualitative things. So quantitatively, there's, the working conditions, the compensation, and so forth, but that only goes so far. The rest of it is really qualitative. And I think that's largely a function of do their values jibe with that of the organization's, their relationships with others in the organization, be that the clientele, parents, management, their peers. And then the third piece is management itself. What's the interface with management? How's the tone set? And if you want to break all that down into specific parts, employee engagement's about your happiness, it's about wellness, it's about feedback, it's about growth opportunities, it's about recognition. But really those three things, a leadership goes forward, do my values jive with the organization, and my relationships with others.
About that, for me, Deborah, it all has to boil down to something simple. Otherwise, I don't get it. And I was thinking, so what is it like? What's it like? And then I thought, how do I feel about that? Like, when I'm feeling emotionally connected to work, and it's when there's two things. One, when I believe I'm bringing value to the workplace. So in other words, my presence and what I do and who I am makes a difference in the workplace. Positive. Second thing is that the value is perceived. I'm, in other words, basically through leadership, that, yeah, we appreciate what you're doing. So it's the value I bring and the perceived value of what I bring.
These are key ideas expressed by the professionals who were interviewed. Employee engagement is high when individuals are committed and energized. Value and focus is given when the organization's vision is clear and the employees are part of the development process. Let's hear about engagement at their particular organization.
I think it's mixed.
Tell me about that.
I think that for us in education, students, like when I think of what are the things that make people more and less engaged in a business, for us, students are in between that. They're in between the employer and they're in between the staff. And I think that most people in this like kids and love teaching or what they're doing, and that keeps them going even if they're frustrated with the institution. And if we're thinking of teachers, we have this weird thing of being very independent teachers in what they do in their classrooms, yet part of an organization as well. So I think the things that make people less engaged are mental health, depending on what their own mental health is, personal life factors, and that might not make them less engaged. It might just change the way they engage. If they've just had a baby, or if their kids are having their own struggles, or if their aging parents are ill, or it might mean that that has to change how they do things. It might not make them less engaged, but it might make it different for them. The tone of a school, I think that a tone can make people more and less engaged, where they're at in their career. So yeah, some people starting to get burnt out are going to become less engaged, maybe, if they are at a place where they need some kind of new stimulation and they're getting bored or tired or whatever it is. The mixture of staff, and how they get along with each other. So if people are really getting along well, maybe the engagement is higher, and if they are at odds with each other, then the engagement might be lower. Or it might, again, because of students, it might just be more isolated into silos, but still high engagement, but very alone and disparate. And then I think sometimes students and families can be a bit overwhelming, and that sometimes people can disengage a bit if they feel that way. The other thing I think is the union and management politics have sometimes made people disengage. So that that really big strike we had, I think that changed a lot. The one that went in June and then into September and was like 5 weeks long. I think that some people were like, felt that they'd volunteered a lot of time and that they were through with that. And I also think some younger teachers have come up in it where they don't see volunteering and helping out in the same way as people who were in it before that strike. So,
Management in particular, senior management, really sets the tone. I mean, many ways we have our own values, but they dictate values too, as reflected in the mission statement and working with the board of trustees. What they do is huge. And really at the end of the day, for me, it's where are they coming from? Are they being authentic? What's really happening? Not what's happening on the surface, but what's really happening. And what are our leaders, what are their true intentions and goals? I think when leadership is supportive and transparent and clear, engagement is high. I think when, I'll borrow a term from Jack Frost and that Detective Jet in the miniseries, when they're playing silly buggers, then engagement can wane, and teachers are a pretty intelligent lot, and I think we can really see when that's happening. And I think that can erode engagement. So yeah, management has a huge role to play, not just in the quantitative things, but qualitatively as well. And for me personally, it comes down to, are you being supportive? Are you aligning what your goals are with goals of your employees? Are you genuinely listening? Are you being authentic? Yeah, so there we go.
Interesting question, because I'm more and more, as I go through all this stuff, I think, okay, how do you define things? So how do you define high? Is high 5 and above? Is high 8.5 and above? So there's that. For me, defining high would be like on a scale of 1 to 10, like definitely above 8. And I would say it's about 7.5. So I wouldn't say it's high. I would say it's good. And that's not the question. So if you have to do a yes or no, it would be no. However, I think it's good, and it's probably as good as it's ever been, if not better. Yeah. So
why do you think that?
And again, it's a sense, right? There's nothing mathematical or any research in here, but it's sort of through anecdotal interactions with people. So what you notice in a staff meeting, that's a real eye opener. Of course, having been well, forget the assistant and the super, when you were running Alfie and running Pender, you work closely with the counselors. And so counselors have insight into how the school operates in a way a lot of other teachers don't. And so you hear things and you find out things that you would have no idea about otherwise. And it's just what I see, through no fault of leadership in this case, and I'm not saying this, I'm being honest. And something I've always noticed, there's always, I'd say a minority, but it's significant, of teachers who have issues that get in the way of success. And also when it spills, in other words, when it spills over into other staff through, you know, various ways, could be confrontation, it could just be negative gossip, that sort of thing. It brings down the overall level of engagement, in my opinion. Does that make sense?
Totally. Now the interview shifts from the individual to the organization. When considering change in an organization, it is helpful to have a roadmap. Anderson and Anderson provide a visual representation of the steps needed to ensure you engage all employees and plan fully for the change to this new state within the organization. The Change Leaders Roadmap as a Full Stream Process by Anderson and Anderson talks about a series of steps 1 through 9. The first step is prepare to lead the change. The second step is create the organizational vision, commitment, and capability. Step 3, assess the situation to determine design requirements. Step 4, design the desired state. Step 5, analyze the impact. Step 6, plan and organize for implementation. Step 7, implement the change. Step 8, celebrate and integrate the new state. And step 9, learn and course correct. Let's hear from our professionals about the role they see and experience of their own organizational leaders in increasing employee engagement, and then the responses related to their own fluctuation of employee engagement.
Now, you see, this is where you could teach me this one. I think listening is huge. Communication and follow through, and trying to create a positive tone, and then supporting families, teachers, sense of belonging, and Prody encouragement.
You know, management in particular, senior management, you know, really sets the tone. I mean, many ways we have our own values, but they dictate values too, as reflected in the mission statement and working with the board of trustees. What they do is huge. And really at the end of the day, for me, it's where are they coming from? Are they being authentic? What's really happening? Not what's happening on the surface, but what's really happening. And what are our leaders, what are their true intentions and goals? I think when leadership is supportive and transparent and clear, engagement is high. I think when, I'll borrow a term from Jack Frost and that Detective Jet in the miniseries, when they're playing silly buggers, then engagement can wane, and teachers are a pretty intelligent lot, and I think we can really see when that's happening. And I think that can erode engagement. So yeah, management has a huge role to play, not just in the quantitative things, but qualitatively as well. And for me personally, it comes down to, are you being supportive? Are you aligning what your goals are with goals of your employees? Are you genuinely listening? Are you being authentic? Yeah, so there we go.
In the back, also going out of your way as a leader to, you know, check in, how you doing? That can be the phone call. I mean, Mark does that with me. It can obviously in staff meetings, it's a little bit more difficult, but that's where you get a real idea for how the group fits in around leadership overall. I think leaders go into classrooms. You did in mine. I remember you did at Elfie, and I had you for 2 different lessons, and you said, wow, you're really confident in the business lessons. I was teaching something in the Canadian dollar. But you told me something I never forget after that, my math lesson about summarizing the lesson. So, taking what you're teaching and then have the summary. And I learned it in my program, but I'd forgotten it. So I'm giving you examples. That's an example of we hear of positive discipline. That was positive assessment for me. I'd made a mistake, and you pointed it out in a way that I didn't feel judged or condemned. It was really, really useful. And so it's a way of, it's support. It's like, we're here as a team. I'm here. Yes, I'm the leader, and I'm here to support you in what you're doing. So it's not like, I've worked for bosses in business who are kind of like, okay, here's what we do, just do it. And I don't want to hear anything negative, kind of thing. And I'm sure that happens in the school system too. I realize I'm going on and on here, but for me, it's really about feeling that someone has your back, can tell you when things are, and I've been told this, when things are going a little bit awry and I may have to change. So they can be honest with you, but it's delivered in a way that's really respectful and empowering. And that's not easy to do. I feel I've had most of the leaders I've worked with have been, well, maybe not most, but at least half have been really good at that, yourself included. And even those that weren't good at it, I felt wanted to be.
Again, kids, I'm always been quite into kids. And so, and in it, I mean, that in a good way. Like, I really like working with kids. And sometimes when I feel myself feeling discouraged in my job, I have had too much time with only adults. And then when I go back and work with the students, I feel rejuvenated again and remember what I'm doing there. So life stressors have made it different, but I've always been into it. I think that I've waxed and waned. Like when I started to get bored as a teacher, then I went and got my master's and became a counselor. And when I've started to feel a need for change as a counselor, now I'm doing this. And that also my life stuff, because of my daughter, I haven't made this move or tried to even think about this move earlier. Things might have been different had life things been different, right? What else did I think on this? My own engagements. Sometimes other adults can make me feel worn down. Yeah. But the kids are the constant. So my sort of engagement has always been very high. And like when we lived in Vancouver and owned this place up here, and I would, I started to become very almost ruthless with my time, right? That because I wanted to have my weekends up here without work. I was still a teacher then. And so I would work like crazy on the weekdays to get those weekends off. And then when I was doing my master's, obviously I didn't have weekends off, but I became very focused about my time. And then having a baby, and then even with my daughter at this age, like having to get her to this lesson or that place or whatever. So then I do things in the evening or I do it on the weekend. Like I don't feel my engagement went down or up over that. It just changed how it was. And I also feel as a parent, I was way more understanding of, I just understood things way differently than prior to becoming a parent.
It does. Yeah. And I think it's largely a function of what I was just talking about. When the feedback to me is honest and genuine, there's not a lot of game playing. I feel valued. I'm more engaged when there starts to be a lot of game playing. Um, I'm still engaged, and a lot of that is a part of, it's my values, personal values, align with those in education broadly, um, and I'm very much duty driven. So I always feel and I always am engaged, but when I hit a lower cycle, I'd say it's more due to the circumstances around me, and those aren't due to the clientele I work with. That's really a function of management and how I react to management. When I say management, I'm not just including principal, vice principal. I'm also talking about the boards, senior management, and the government.
And then at the ministerial level, right? And I felt really devalued by that process. And there was a lot of public support for the Liberals and people I knew and who had been friends. And for me, that threw me off. I'll be honest, like, it's not like I put up a strike sign or something, but I really thought, okay. And it got worse, with all the litigation and
Yep.
a lot of negative publicity, I know it went both ways, but I really felt when I went into the teaching profession, I really felt it was a valued position in society and that I was doing something worthwhile. When the Liberals came in and tore up the contract, and then we had all the negative stuff for years, which only culminated rather recently, I went a number of years with my engagement lowered because I just didn't feel valued. It was like, okay, yes, I've got a good relationship with my boss, thank goodness. I still want to do a good job, but am I going to really do what I used to do and put myself sort of on the line, which may have been too much. You change over the arc of your career. But I kind of thought, I'm not going to necessarily, go the last mile anymore because there's no payoff. And that I realize now that was a selfish viewpoint. However, it came through this conflict. And I think conflict lowers engagement. I would be different. I am different today. I'd look at it differently today. And what does that mean? I would do my very best not to let that affect me. What's important is the job I do and how I think I'm doing it. I don't really need to have, because I have a lot of experience now, I don't need to have somebody pat me on the back and say, yeah, you're doing a good job. Is it nice? For sure. But I don't really need it. But back then, it had a big effect on me because I saw myself in a profession that was not only being kind of dissed by the premier and the minister of education, etc., but in the newspapers with friends. It was kind of like, wow, that's not so good, right? And you go, wow, what am I in? What am I doing this for? So it makes you think, and it's upsetting. So I think conflict, whether it's, local, like within the school, or on a larger stage, like the one I just described, has affected my engagement in the past. So it's something, conflict's unavoidable, but really it's important to see how we deal with it. Okay, there's going to be conflict. There's no way we're going to avoid it. But how do we deal with it so that people feel empowered afterwards? And that can happen. And when that happens, you take your staff to a different level. People feel more engaged if you can work through that because they gain strength.
Given what I have heard, I have considered the individual responses in relation to Swanson and Holton's core training and development practices. Step 1, analyze or communicate a unified vision. This particular team of professionals indicated from varying perspectives the need to know where the organization was moving with the supporting with the support of a guiding vision. Number 2, design, create shared accountabilities. All 3 of the individuals believed they were in the organization working together for the best outcomes for children. They had global agreement on the practices needed to get there. The specifics would need to be collectively designed through a planning process. Number 3, develop, bring teams together. Although each professional spoke about their school experiences, it is critical for this organization to work as a collective and not as individual silos. Number 4, implement, get leaders on board. From their comments, these individuals believed and experienced their leaders were working directly with them and were implementing a collective plan. Incorporate collaboration tools. Through the incorporation of collaborative tools, there was evidence of the mindset and behavior needed to affect change. However, none of those interviewed talked about evaluation or reflection of the process and results needed to meet the desired outcome. Evaluation and the learning that comes from reflective evaluation is missing from this change process. Although my personal experience with this organization confirms that this process is stated within the strategic plan, the individuals on the ground, of which these 3 professionals are reflective of, are not aware of this vital piece of a robust change process, which blends in this key element of an effective training and development process. The evaluation process, complete with reflection and review, is a critical piece of the process for future organizational and, in turn, student success. Although evaluations are often met with discomfort, it is through this discomfort that realization, understanding, and reflection move an organization to outcomes which better serve their respective stakeholders.